I'm so glad to be speaking today with Megha Majumdar. Megha Majumdar was born in Kolkata but moved to the United States in 2006 to study anthropology at Harvard University, following up with a master's degree at Johns Hopkins University. She is currently an editor at Catapult magazine and publishing house. Her debut novel, A Burning, has been wildly successful, and it's a novel I absolutely adore and am so impressed and moved by. So we will be talking about this powerful, brilliant, brave, beautiful novel, among other things. Thank you so much for joining us, Megha.
Thank you so much for chatting with me, Kartika, and thank you for this very generous introduction.
I wanted to start by asking you if there was a particular need that this book was born from for you.
That's a great question. You know, I think that it came from a place of wanting to ask certain questions about the rise of the sort of extreme nationalism that we're seeing in India, certainly, but also elsewhere in the world, including in the US. And I think I just wanted to, after, having grown up in India and, following the news like all of us are doing, I think I just wanted to spend some time asking how somebody moves forward in such an environment. So that's where the novel came from.
That's wonderful. And I can really feel that pulsing through it from so many different perspectives, the questions about how did we all get here? From the people involved in pushing it forward to those resisting. Yes, it does that really marvelously. You had such tenderness towards your characters, demonstrated a deep grasp of their inner lives, no matter what their age, their gender, sexuality, class. So I was curious about how you achieved that.
That is very kind. I think, one thing that was really important to me while I was working on the book was I didn't want to write characters who were flat in any way. I knew that this was going to be a book which addressed some pretty grim realities, but at the same time, nobody is only their suffering. And certainly there's a deep intelligence that I grew up seeing in the people around me. There's just a constant sense of humor that I always saw around me. And I wanted that spirit to be in the book, There are people who watch TV and consume entertainment and tease each other and have aspirations unconnected to, their daily lives. And so that fullness was something that felt really true to me. I think the book would have fallen a little flat without it. That was my fear.
I loved the experimentation with the different sections. So with the way the book was organized as well, we switched between the three characters, Jiva and Lovely and PT Sir, and then those interludes, right? I loved the titles of those sections as well. There was humor in them, especially since what happens in them is so is distressing, because some of them echo news stories that we've seen of just how horrible the absolute cruelty and damage that's taking place, right? And some of them were a little bit lighter, but those titles were excellent. I also really admired how different each voice became, and so that linguistic play of Lovely's perspective. So can you speak a little bit about that if you want to?
I'm happy to talk about it. So Lovely's voice, I wanted a sense of aspiration in her voice. She's someone who is struggling to learn English. She's not fluent in it yet, but I don't know about you, Kartika, but when I was a kid, I absorbed this lesson really early that I had to learn English. The when I was in kindergarten and I was applying to like a real school for the first time, I got rejected from all of these schools because my English was so poor. And then I had to go to these special English classes, and I was so little. And, you know, just I had to become better at this language. And I was just told that you need it for school, you will need it in the future. And that sense of aspiration and struggle, I really wanted in Lovely's voice. I also wanted to, I think it felt important because English is also, you know, it's such a class signifier in India. It's the language of the elite, it's the language of privilege, and who has access to English, who can speak and read in English. These are very complex questions in India, and I just wanted to have some acknowledgement of that in the book.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it comes through. So it comes through because with Lovely, I mean, so many types of marginalization there, and yes, that linguistic carnage that you're talking about, right? With one's own language not being enough, and her fight, hers and Jivan's fight to find a foothold in society, upward mobility. Yeah, that was, and yes, it's so heavy, so prevalent, such a distressing part of India. And yeah, you again, very managed with a very light hand, but still really intentional. While we're talking about Lovely, so Lovely is a hijra, and I admire that her sexuality, her gender presentation is very much in context of her culture, right? So she doesn't say she's trans, for example. She says she's a hijra, and at one point of time, she also talks about her decision to stay half and half. And I really admire that because that can be complex depending on who the reader is and their understanding of it. Would you speak a little bit to the choices you made there and how you navigated that?
I think I just wanted to write this really joyous, defiant person who understands very deeply what it is to be shamed, and also what it is to reject that shame, you know? And so it was important to get the context right, for sure. And for that, I really relied on some excellent ethnographies. And of course, like the category of hijra is not quite, like you cannot quite map it onto Western categories. It has implications. It is so closely tied to class in a way that it isn't quite in Western categories. And so it definitely felt like its own, you know, context with its own history and its own practices that I wanted to respect. And then within that, I really wanted to write this person who, because of where she is, feels the full might of this oppressive state. And at the same time reaches for, I think, the wildest possible dream in a movie obsessed country like India, which is, you know, to be a movie star. And I wanted to write somebody who, a big part of this book was just showing that you can have conditions of oppression, but it doesn't mean that people stop dreaming big dreams. You know, it doesn't mean that people give up on their ambitions. People chase them with a lot of grit and a lot of determination. And so I really enjoyed writing Lovely's story, that she's chasing this dream that everybody thinks is just kind of silly and ridiculous, and, you know, she'll never get it, but she doesn't give up.
She doesn't, and she makes it, which is, I was so happy that she made it. And we also saw the cost of it. We saw how we all have to be complicit in some ways in systems. but she still made it, and it was joyous and beautiful. And she always has her very specific, completely wonderful sense of humor. Yeah, I absolutely loved Lovely sections too. They were so great.
Thank
I
you so
loved
much.
it's so wonderful. And through her story, and in contrast to Jeevan's, we see how social media, we see the WhatsApp pushes her forward and to fame, while we see what that does for what that does to Jeevan. So that was also so masterfully managed. Yeah, I absolutely loved her story. While we're talking about gender and sexuality, I thought you wrote what was, at least in my experience of growing up in the subcontinent in India, what is most forbidden: bodies, desire, female bodies, queer bodies. We have menstruation. You talk about that botched, completely illegal, terrible castration that takes place. I think it's unfortunate that this is true, but it is radical almost to talk about bodies that are female, queer, um, marginalized bodies openly, without it being through the male gaze or being for pleasure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit to the decisions you made there and to writing those bodies?
The bodily vulnerability of these people felt so crucial to confront. It is so much of how these people, these characters, are shamed and oppressed and made to feel aware of themselves in certain spaces. Even something like, there's a scene where Lovely is standing in front of a store, and the owner says, please go away, otherwise the customers won't come. So even from something as simple as, where can you stand on the street, to something much more intimate, like who can you be in love with, and what are the spaces in which you can express that love. I think it felt really important to be attentive to that, not always in a way that necessarily foregrounds it, or like makes it a thing that I want to be big in the book, but without it, I think there's a dimension of moving through this world which is lost, right? And I think for anybody who has grown up as a girl in India or in South Asia, I think the like very constant sense of being just very aware of your body. We learned to pay attention to it in school with policing of uniforms and stuff like that, and then you would go on buses and public transport, and it was my friends and I just grew used to so many experiences of being touched and groped and stuff like that on buses. And so I think that experience of like moving through a society which tries to shame you for your body, I think it's something that we've experienced, and that's kind of the like ugly truth of it, is that you are so aware of your body, even though your mind is elsewhere. You're thinking about your homework, you're thinking about your friends, you're thinking about, a movie you want to watch, or so, but you cannot move through those spaces without that society reminding you over and over again what kind of body you have and what can be done to it. So I think I wanted to have that truth and that vulnerability in the book.
I wanted to ask how the political forces and power in the book mirror the politics and corruption of South Asia, of India, even maybe West Bengal. If you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
The place in the book, the West Bengal in the book, has fictional elements, and I think anybody familiar with West Bengal will know that it's in many ways made up what's in the book. It doesn't correspond to West Bengal politics necessarily, but you know, I think this is one of those things that I will let the reader draw their own correspondences. I wrote about the concerns that I had and what I was reading in the news. And I think in many ways, the material for this book is material that has been available to all of us. So I think I'll let readers draw their own conclusions.
Yes, absolutely. You have written it. It's there. Yes. I thought about the accumulation of news stories of injustices towards Muslims, injustices towards queer people, towards people struggling with generational poverty, and just, you know, that overwhelming how numb eventually we become or have to become to that relentless barrage of those stories, right? And towards the rising horrible extremism and corruption in politics. And that's really what fiction can do and what this book does. You can't really look away or become numb when we really feel the humanity, when we feel the complex, nuanced, really vivid lives of all these characters. I was also wondering, as you wrote this, while you were writing this book, and now it's out and everybody is reading it, and it's just, you know, very completely deservingly so, you know, it's done so well. So while you were writing it, and now that you have, what have you experienced are the dangers and pleasures and responsibilities that come with writing about politics, about this power, about marginalization and poverty? Yeah, about these important topics, and being able to do it in a compelling way and evoking emotion. So long-winded way of asking, what do you think are the dangers and pleasures and responsibilities of that, of writing in this way?
I think, you know, I asked myself if I could tell a story about Hindu nationalism without writing about these marginalized characters, and I felt that I couldn't. And so that was kind of, you know, step one of determining that I needed these characters to tell this story. And then I think the responsibility for me felt like a responsibility to write these characters in a complex way, you know, to make sure that they're not just their past, or they're not just one aspect of their identity. You know, that they have room to, yes, like struggle and face the systems and institutions around them that are constantly challenging them, but also that they have room for humor and joy, and they have, you know, bigger dreams. And just, you know, to allow these characters to be full people, you know, and to allow them to resist the narrative that this state seeks to put upon them. You know, a character like Jivan, she is accused of certain things because, you know, aspects of her identity and stories of her past make it easy for the state to say, well, this person is like this, so they must have acted in that way. But for her to say, that is not my narrative, you know, what she cared about was having a job at a mall and enjoying her smartphone, you know, and getting better at English and teaching English to this other person. And so just allowing the characters room to have their own narratives, even if the state in the book doesn't see it.
Yes.
That felt really important. And that was, you know, that was the responsibility of it. And that was also the energy and fuel of it, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And it comes through. The book tackles quite directly freedom of speech. So did that make you nervous as you were writing about a young woman who is persecuted, who for for expressing herself? Were you nervous when writing this book?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, you know, I was writing it in this space of seeing what felt true to me. It was very much just, you know, me and the page, and I wasn't really thinking beyond that.
Yeah.
And that was very freeing. And I also think, you know, somebody disagrees with my novel, they're free to write their own novel, you know? So.
Yes. Very wise. Wonderful. Perfect. My next question was going to be about the traditions and stories that really inspired you, and so we're in tune. You.
um, yeah, I mean, I think when we were kids, we read so widely, you know, and part of it was just reading what we could find. Like we used to go to these little secondhand, like used bookstores that were just like on the street, and you would just kind of look at what they had and, like, you know, pick out what was available. And so we read so widely. I mean, we read Indian folk tales. I remember I had a book of Russian folk tales, and you know, we read Nancy Drew and Babysitter's Club and all of that with no context. I had no idea what a babysitter was, or like what it looked like to like put a 14-year-old in charge of your kid. It made no sense to me, but I read it, you know. And
Yeah.
I think that sense of like reading extremely widely, and in school too, you know, we were reading you know, Indian authors, of course, but we were also reading from other cultures, often with very little context. But I think that range, that exposure to different kinds of writing, different ways in which English can settle into the story that you want to tell, that was a really key realization for me, you know,
Yeah.
that this one language can bring you stories from Russia and fairy tales from Germany, and also folk tales from, you know, West Bengal and South India and all over the place.
I wanted to ask you what you imagine and hope that we at at the South Asian Avant-Garde anthology, as a dissident South Asian anthology, what do you hope and imagine we might achieve? And if you have any advice you'd like to give us.
Oh my God, I have no advice. I mean, I am just so full of admiration for what you're doing, and for Kamil's work. And I'm just really excited, you know. I'm so glad that there is a space for South Asian writers to do work that feels experimental and innovative, and have a space where they can pursue what they are curious about. And to have that space feels so valuable. So thank you for creating that space.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are. And
It's
this
such
was,
a pleasure, Kartika.
I really, really enjoyed this. This was so wonderful. Thank you so much.